So welcome everyone. I'm Reverend Dieke. I serve at White Rock United Methodist Church in East Dallas, and I'm joined by some colleagues here on this call to have a conversation about elections. Here we are in Texas. It's early voting. It's happening. I will shamefully say I have not gone to vote yet, but I'm thinking like we might get done with this in enough time where I can actually run out and go do my early voting now. So today, because we have through the end of I think next week to get our early voting done, which we'll talk about here more in a minute. But really what I wanted to do is have a roundtable conversation about voting and why this is voting and elections are definitely something that are important to people of faith. And so as I typically do for Church and Society, I start us with something. I read something from the social principles just to kind of ground us. And I'm going to read two different pieces from the same part of the principles called political community. And it starts out under the heading of basic freedoms and human rights. And it says, we hold governments responsible for the protection of the rights of the people to free and fair elections and to the freedoms of speech, religion, assembly, communication, media, and petitions for redress of grievances without fear or reprisal, to the right to privacy and to the guarantee of the rights to adequate food, clothing, shelter, education, and health. And then scroll down a little bit farther. It says political responsibility. The strength of a political system depends upon the full and willing participation of its citizens. The church should continually exert a strong ethical influence upon the state, supporting policies and programs deemed to be just and opposing policies and programs that are unjust. That's in the social principles, folks. That's what we profess to be as a church and as a denomination, the United Methodist Church. I know not all gather in this space are United Methodist, but I feel like it's a pretty good grounding space for us to launch into. So with that said, I would love for the others joining me in this to introduce yourselves and just let everybody know who you are and what you're representing in this space, because I know we all come from a variety of different spaces, and some of us are overlapping and bringing ourselves here representing a lot of different spaces, but feel free to include all of them or as many as you choose. And Stacey, I'll let you go first.
Well, hello, everybody. My name is Reverend Stacey Brown, and today I'm representing Elevate Movement. I'm the executive director and founder of this organization, and we are about healing and wholeness in the Black and Brown communities, mainly focusing on mental health from a holistic perspective, grounding in the 8 dimensions of wellness. So if you don't know about that, Google it. Trust me, it's going to be a good Google. But I also have worked with different organizations, Dallas Votes Coalition, Faith in Texas. I'm a member of the Faith Forward, Dallas Board, and just a whole host of other organizations. So I'm very excited to be here and have this conversation.
I love it. Love it. Scott.
Sure. First of all, thanks, Phil, for organizing this. I am Scott Atnip. I am a United Methodist also, living in Huntsville, Texas. East Texas is certainly an area that we should be paying attention to, according to a conversation we had with the NAACP Legal Defense and Educational Fund last week. So, hey, East Texas folks, we got some work to do. But I think I'm here today as the Director of Public Witness for Texas Impact, who represents mainline and interfaith groups in the state legislative process. And so certainly voting has been at the forefront of our conversations over the course of the last year, and now we're seeing it play out. Y'all, this is important. So glad y'all are tuning in for this conversation.
Love it. Awesome. Paul.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm Father Paul Klitzke. I'm the rector of an Episcopal church in Dallas and a board member with Texas Impact as well. Just found that advocacy in general is really important to my ministry. You're trying to give voice to issues that affect all of us and elevate those things that justice expects of us. So I appreciate being included and glad to be here.
Yeah, so this came up, I think, I don't even know what time is anymore. I don't remember what election it was, but just people kind of had this thought of like, why are people of faith really making a big push on elections, and why are elections such an important thing? And like, I can vote, like, but it doesn't always feel like my vote counts or matters, or like there's always these conversations that take place. And so I'm also representing a few different spaces here. One being one of the pastors at White Rock United Methodist. I also chair the North Texas Conference Board of Church and Society, and then I sit on the Faith Forward Dallas and Texas Impact boards. And so I appreciate bringing all these worlds together to talk about this, because what I'm seeing in our local congregation is people having a hard time connecting why this is a faith issue with elections. And so, there's always this conversation of, well, we don't want to be too political or overly political, or like, well, like we can't say that in church, just like conversations like this. So I would love to hear, and again, Stacey, we might start with you. Just why is it that you believe the elections to be an issue of faith, and not just faith, but like, as we've had conversations before, but holistic faith? I think what you have to say about this is so beautiful.
Right. And really looking at it from holistic perspective is that the issues that we are discussing are related to the principles that each of us hold dear in our sacred text. If you look at the Bible, if you look at the Holy Quran, if you look at the scripture, it tells you one of the main things is love yourself, right? Well, love the Lord God.
Mm-hmm.
Love your neighbor as yourself, right? So how do we love our neighbor? We love our neighbor by taking care of our communities. We love our neighbor by looking out for our best interests. You know, Matthew 25:40 really goes into how we are supposed to love our neighbor, ensuring that those that are in prison, that we're taking care of them. Those that are hungry, we're taking care of them. Those that are thirsty, we're taking care of them. So how do we do that? What controls that? Well, policies control who's fed, who's educated, how the prison system works. So how can we have input in the systems that are literally controlling who is fed and who is taken care of if we do not have a voice in participating in the systems? So really, we are exercising our faith when we vote, because we are furthering our ability to really utilize the resources that we're given from our public to give to those that are in need. So how dare we not take advantage of the ability that we are given to provide for our neighbors and really bring light to issues that where people are being left behind. When it comes to mental illness, if you look at the populations that are being affected, they're primarily Black and brown and lower socioeconomical and standing. So how do I then use the resources? Well, votings allocate budgets, right? They help people to determine where the money goes. So if I don't use my voice, then essentially I am okaying through my apathy, through my non-participation, the hardships that my neighbor is experiencing. So voting is love. Voting is love. Voting is biblical. And voting is necessary. So I'll just say that.
Voting is love, and how dare we? I mean, whew, come on. Stacey started us strong. Scott, Paul, and I want this to kind of be just a roundtable conversation. So feel free to jump in and share your thoughts on what Stacey just mentioned. I mean,
yeah, I don't know if y'all can see me or if it was in speaker view, but I was laughing while Stacey was speaking. And Pastor, you just brought us to church. Thank you. And I was laughing because you just stole every one of my talking points. And for those who have seen our presentation, I did one at our United Methodist Women's Legislative event a couple weeks ago. We had a slide up that talked about how every different, or not every, but many, if not most, different religious texts have some version of love your neighbor in the text. And, you know, we went through that slide, and then my next slide talked about Matthew 25. And so like, I feel like you've just done what I usually say on the topic, and you did it well. What I think I would add to that is certainly people of faith have a responsibility for making sure that we're caring for our neighbors, and elections and public policy is one major way that we do that, right? To make sure that we care for the hungry and thirsty and sick and imprisoned and all the different groups that need help. I think what I would add to the conversation that Stacey said so well is that we need to recognize that the more people that participate in democracy, the more representative our elected officials will be, because we know that people who are extremists, and we can say on either side, right? People who are extreme are going to show up at the polls. And so the question, especially in primary elections, is, are we going to allow a small group of people who tend to be the most extreme to dictate who's going to be representing us for the next 2 to 4 years? And if we're talking about the role of the church, partisanship aside, right? But role of the church should be, or the role of faith communities should be, to make sure that the community is represented. And that means that the entire community needs to be participating and not just a small sect. And so the more people that we get to show up and participate in democracy, the more representative that democracy will be. And we've said it, I think, the last 3 weeks on the podcast we host, that 95% of elections in Texas are decided in primary elections. 95% of elections.
Okay, so,
are decided.
what does that mean? Expound on that.
Yeah, so right now we're in the primary elections that are going to be determining who is on the ballot in November. And because of the way the districts are drawn, a vast majority of those seats are predetermined, right? They've drawn a seat to be a safe Republican or a safe Democratic district, and that's especially true after a redistricting year. And so, everybody should turn out in November, and those are super important too. Like, we don't want to discount that. But for example, the district I live in, there are 8 people running in one primary, and there's not a person running in the other primary, and for one particular race. And so that one's going to be decided in March. In those March elections, very few people show up, right? Maybe 5%, 10% if we're doing well. So it's really important right now that congregations, people of faith, make sure that the entire electorate is represented in this election. And I think that's an important role for people to be considering right now.
You said 5 to 10% show up on primary elections?
Don't quote me on that number. I'll have to go back and look. I think that might be for the runoff. So don't quote me on the numbers, but it's small. Paul's laughing. Josh is going to be yelling at me right now.
Even if you had to make them up.
Totally. 87% of statistics made up, right?
I'll find that number. Give me a minute.
I did hear that somewhere. Maybe just recently. Boy, I hope Stacey saw me snapping for you on the screen. Just I'll echo Scott's accolades for having done such a fine job of kicking off this conversation. I didn't think there was anything left to say, and Scott managed to come up with some really great things as well. I guess I'm grateful to be in your company, and that I would say beyond all of that, I think that perhaps, or maybe not beyond, but to accentuate part of it is part of the notion is I think people are intimidated to participate in the early elections because maybe they feel they don't know the candidates. It's the big elections where there's TV debates and name recognition, and it's all the more reason why community matters so much. Actually discussing candidates or the voting process with other people is both an encouragement for their participation, but also an opportunity to find out what they know about who is standing for election. Perhaps also, if you can, or where possible, entering into those conversations with an open mind, because perhaps someone will share something that will change who you think about voting for as well. So I think the sense of community around that is important, not only so that we get every vote we can, and all the fullness of that participation, but also in our own preparation to vote. So that's my meek attempt at an addition to the fabulous things that have already been said.
No, I love it. And one of the things that Texas Impact has really empowered me to do is say, like, you get to go and have an opinion and have a relationship with your elected officials. And so both through like my work with the General Board of Church and Society, but then also especially Texas Impact, it's said like, these are the people who are elected to represent you. So like, make sure they know who you are and what you represent, right? Like they're representing you, but like they have to know what it is to represent. And so if you're not sharing your values, if you're not sharing your opinions on things, then like they're just out there doing their own thing. And I will say, the last senator that represented me, I let him know a whole lot about the things that I valued and never once heard back from him. My state senator, that regardless, right? I redistricted again. I don't think he's going to be my senator anymore. I can't remember. I need to double check that. But regardless, even with like at our federal senators, like I reach out to them pretty regularly, and one of them responds somewhat regularly, and the other one just ghosts me constantly. So like that doesn't mean I stop though, right? Like it's still important that they know and continue to hear from us because they're there to represent us, and they need to know that even if we will never agree on anything, they need to know how we feel about it and why that's important to us. So there we go. I'm gonna put my
Well, and those conversations are important, especially in these primary elections. And Josh did confirm it's 10% of the voting age population typically vote in the primary.
Thank you, Josh.
So you can quote me now. But those conversations are especially important. And Phil, you said at the beginning you haven't voted yet. I'll be honest, I haven't voted yet either. And the reason is I have no idea who I'm voting for in most of the races so far. Because if we're honest, I think it's a lot easier to go vote in November because if we haven't done our homework, we can vote by party ID. And in a primary, like, we don't have that, right? We actually have to learn the candidates. And that's why it's so important, I think, for listeners to do that homework so that we can lead our congregations and lead our friends and networks and provide that information and make sure that people know they can go look at the League of Women Voters website, vote411.org, to check those voters guides. But we actually have to do some homework. And that's why it's especially important, I think, that the congregations are encouraging people to do that work now, to go vote. You can't just show up without having done research this time.
So vote411.org. Anybody else have other, Stacey, go ahead. We have other resources, other thoughts on that?
I would just say that, for the most part, and this is on both sides of the aisle, is that people have pushed mobilization, but very little education. So not just about the people that are running, but the policies that are, up for election. I will say on especially the municipal elections, when there's a lot of proposals on bonds and things like that, a lot of people are walking in, and I have been myself, and this is somebody that's in the mix, have gone to the polls real ignorant on some of those propositions. Like, is it saying if I vote yes, then that means I'm for it, or if I vote no, just how they're worded. But if we were to include education with our mobilization efforts and really let people know it's about the policies, it's about the issues, not simply about the person. Because let me tell you what else goes wrong when we focus on that. Then when we focus on the person, this is when we have people that have been in elected office for 30 something years that no longer represent the people that are in their constituency. But because it's name recognition and, they've been in office for forever, we become complacent, and rather than educating ourselves on, is this person still voting in our best interests? So I would just add that it's really important for us to push that as well. So people aren't just voting on, okay, well, I saw your sign on the way coming in for the vote. Your picture looked the best, so let me just vote for you.
You had the biggest sign, right? Because
right, because it's real. It's real.
But I think to Phil's point earlier, and that's actually where I was going when I launched off of my last answers. That's why it's so important for us to get to know the candidates, and to have actual relationships with the human beings who are running for office, so that we know, right? Like, hey man, you're not doing your job anymore. You're not representing this community well. And when we have those relationships, that also gives us more standing with others in our community, because we can share the story of what we've learned through our relationship. And sometimes that's good, and sometimes that's bad, right?
So I'm just going to show some cards here. There was a guy who's running for first time elected as our Texas state rep here, and he came to our house twice, and I thought, man, props to you, like that. Whereas there's another person who's probably going to win, because he's a much bigger name, and honestly, he may be fantastic, may be the best candidate. I'm not entirely sure, but I don't know. There's something about like somebody showing up to my door. It just kind of that grind, like that grind mentality that I thought, I really appreciate that. Now, at the same time, there's been a lot of candidates who come by our house, and I don't know why I chose one over the other one, but like, I don't know. I fight back and forth between this, like, just because you're a really well-known name, does that really mean that you are going to be the best representation for who I am and my values? Or is there something about bringing some new blood in? And I'm just throwing things out here. I don't know if y'all have thoughts or opinions on that, or you just said, Stacey, right? Like it's so much more about policies. The hard thing is, if somebody's never been in office before, I don't fully know what their policies are going to be. I can go off what they say, right? But we know how that goes often with politicians. So I don't know. Do you have advice for people on? I think education really is an important part. So other than just like vote411.org, what are some ways to educate and make good decisions?
I'm gonna. This may be a little controversial, but I'm gonna go ahead and say it because I ain't never shown for controversy.
Come on now.
I would say that if people really followed how Jesus organized and how Jesus got the word out about what he was doing, you would understand that it's not going to be from a stationary place. Jesus traveled, Jesus walked, Jesus door knocked. Jesus went to the people rather than waiting for them to come to us. And I think a lot of where we go wrong is we feel like people are going to come to us, but a lot of it is not understanding their circumstance. We're wondering why people don't necessarily vote, why people don't necessarily get out. It's not because they're apathetic. It's because we have to understand from the holistic perspective as to why they're not coming. In Texas, I'm allowed to have time off to go vote. However, if it's between me having these hours worked and supporting my family or going to vote, guess what? I'm gonna work these hours. If it's between me having transportation to get to the polls, because we won't even talk about DART and how they cut a lot of bus routes in the southern sector. I'm not gonna touch on that today too much. But if it's between me taking a 2-hour bus trip to get to the polls and casting my vote, guess what? I'm not gonna do it. So we have to look at it from a holistic perspective. And when the candidates are coming to talk to me about this issue, it's not just coming to ask for, my vote. What are you offering? What solutions are you bringing? When Jesus went around, he always brought offering as well. It wasn't just about him giving word. I'm gonna go ahead. Y'all are here, so let's feed you. Let's give you a miracle. Let's heal you. Let's give you something. So that way, when you are becoming my evangelist, becoming my missionary, and sharing the word, it's not just something that I can say with my words. It's something tangibly I can show you. So that's just my 2 cents on that. We need to be more like Jesus.
I feel like if we're going to start somewhere, that's not a bad place to start, right? Paul, what are your thoughts on your community and voting? What are they?
I'm pretty fortunate in my parish life. I've experienced people who've been very interested in not only participating in the voting process, but trying to facilitate that for others. We've got a number of people who help register voters. We have a number of parishioners who are volunteers to help at polling places. I think that we need to continue to do all of those things. I guess the other thing I've tried to encourage is that the piece that we've spent some time talking about here is, regardless of who is elected, that how we communicate, I think, matters a great deal. It also might inform our representatives not only of our opinion, but that it may inform their their position as they seek re-election. So seeking to understand where they have positions and what they are and why helps us then respond with who we are and why we hold the priorities that we do and how to address them well.
Yeah, so I think it's a good space to move kind of this mobilization idea, right? Like, I think education's a huge part of it. Stacey, thanks for bringing that. I think mobilization is the next piece, and I think as faith communities, that's a really important thing for us to do. And so you mentioned people working the polls. I know that's a really important piece coming up, both here in March, and it's probably almost too late for that now. I know there's voting day is actually coming up, and there's probably still chances to do some of that, but really moving toward November is going to be a huge push for that, and making sure that we have election judges and we have poll watchers, all these kind of things, even hospitality, right? I know there was Faith in Texas here in Dallas last election cycle was really good about mobilizing a lot of different faith communities to have water and snacks and stuff like that available at the polling locations. So I even was talking to a colleague the other day who was saying that they really pushed their faith community to have 100% voter turnout. And my response was, I love that, but is that just something you push from the pulpit, or is that something that you put in communications, or do you actually track that? Because if you track it, I want to know how you track it, and what are y'all doing, and how can we be a part of that? But is that stepping over boundaries, right? Is that crossing boundaries that as a faith community we shouldn't be doing? So I put that out. I love to hear y'all's thoughts and opinions on what mobilization looks like for faith communities.
I don't have the deep. Oh, go ahead, Stacey.
So I mentioned earlier about providing offering when we're coming to our communities. There may be some people within our community, like I said, where there's extenuating circumstances as to, why they're not voting, but how do I support them? So if providing these voter education classes, these voter mobilization efforts, but in addition, can we bring in some of our nonprofits to give food baskets? So can we do a joint effort? For some of our folks, education may be an issue where they come from. So maybe they won't share it with you, but maybe they can't read. So how do you offer assistance in really understanding the ballot? Support within your, and again, going back to some of these elected officials, how can you know what the desire and the will is for our communities if you don't talk to them? How are you going to know? But providing these different things, in addition to mobilizing them. Okay, so we got you to the polls, we got you registered. How can I pray for you? Something as simple as that, incorporating our faith into this. But I think that's where you start, is really seeing them as human first, voter second.
I love that.
I think I like the idea of a challenge to try to shoot for like 100% turnout. I think beyond that, I mean, there are some education principles that might encourage greater participation. I know that through Texas Impact, I've seen a number of presentations on the impact of a vote, presidential election versus like an early primary. Your vote is worth so much more in a primary or a local election because there are fewer votes being cast. And it's almost ironic. It's where we have the least turnout and that like greatest effectiveness or efficacy of our personal vote. And I think that there probably does need to be some education within our faith communities about that level of impact and the significance that our vote has in these other elections. I think there's probably some opportunities for education to kind of lower the maybe anxiety or help people prepare themselves, even if it's just sharing resources such as the Vote 411 or whatever site that Scott had referenced. There are some resources that could be shared that might help people feel better equipped to go and vote, which might encourage them to participate and might help lead us towards that 100% participation mark.
Yeah, and we've had a chance over the course of the last year or so through Texas Impact to interview and have conversations with a lot of different congregations who are doing this work. I think the most important thing for congregations to do is just have the conversation and start there, right? Like, what is your ministry context? What's around you? What are you willing to do within your congregation? There was a synagogue in the Houston area last year who set the goal of hitting 100% participation, and they found a mechanism through a local partner to track their congregants to see who'd actually turned out, and made telephone calls, I think, to those who hadn't yet. A church that we just talked to this last week, University Presbyterian Church in Austin, last year, in the midst of the height of COVID, worked with their church secretary to identify everybody in the congregation who was 65 plus, and called and made sure that they had access to a mail-in ballot application, and helped walk them through the process to see if they needed help with that. This year, since fewer people in theory are using mail-in voting, they decided, since they're across the street from the University of Texas, that they'd set up a voter information booth outside. So when students walked by on the way to and from class, they could make sure that they were registered. They could make sure they had all the necessary information. They had candy and talked to them about church ministries, and just made sure that they knew how to participate, and also helped recruit election workers. And so, not everybody lives across the street from the or has a church across the street from the University of Texas. I recognize that, but all of our congregations have some kind of ministry that they're involved with people that might need a little extra nudge or a little extra help to vote. It might be the food pantry, it might be the daycare at your school or your church, any of those things. So my encouragement would be to start the conversation now about what you can do for November to make sure that everybody's participating in this election. And Phil, I want to push back a little bit on something you said and kind of bringing this one in. It might feel like it's too late to participate in this primary election, but as an election worker or monitor, but the NAACP Legal Defense and Education Fund last week asked us if we could promote the opportunity to become an election monitor, even for election day. And they're having a training this Saturday. And so I just, in the chat here, gave to Phil the link to sign up for that. Anywhere in Texas, you can sign up for this online training, but it'll help equip you to be a monitor to make sure that everything is going well in the polling locations near you. And they're especially interested in finding some people in 13 particular East Texas counties that have large Black populations and maybe fewer resources to deal with concerns. And so I hope everybody who's listening will consider signing up to be an election monitor. And if you know somebody in East Texas, pass it along and see if you can't get them to sign on as well.
That's awesome. I'll take that link. I'll put it out in all the places that this gets published, just to make sure everybody has an access to that link. That's fantastic. I'm glad to know that we can still have productive
not
ways.
too late. Not too late.
That's good. No, thanks for pushing back. I need that.
Yeah, but a lot of time to organize for November. So I hope a couple of y'all will do that now, and everybody will do it for November.
Do y'all have up? So we were talking before we got started about the vote by mail. Does anybody have specifics on what congregations can and can't do, or maybe more so what they can't do now regarding vote by mail? And because I know that was a big conversation around SB1. Does anybody have details on that? And if not, we can try to find that and link to it later. Because I think I saw that what was it? We said like 25 or 30% of them are coming back as not being sufficient or not being correct whenever they send them in.
We've had people on the Weekly Witness podcast the last 2 weeks talk about the specifics related to mail-in voting, and I feel like I would get myself in trouble if I tried to recite all of those.
So go back to Weekly Witness, and you can find all the information there if you are really wanting to help your faith communities with.
And if you have questions, you can email us at engagement@texasimpact.org, and we'll get specific answers for you.
Okay.
I just feel like because there's litigation going on, and I'm not the attorney, I don't want to be the one to try to answer those.
If you don't have the definite answer,
not going to make it up.
We can point people in the direction. Engagement@texasimpact.org.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Good. I think that's a big way. I think it's again, turns out we're still in a global pandemic. I know it doesn't always seem like that, but we still are. No, that's good. Okay. Other mobilization, any other pieces that y'all think are really important to bring to folks to encourage or inspire as we look both in here for March as well as November?
I think it's also important to educate people on who can and cannot vote. Especially with our returning citizens, there's a lot of people who thought they were ineligible to vote. Turns out they were, because of misinformation that was put out there. That's why it's also important to educate our people, because they're going to receive information, whether it's from the internet, whether it's from a trusted source or untrusted source. We all know things go on the internet that you would believe. Like, how did they believe that? But they will, because it's not because it's lack of information, lack of awareness, so it's important for us to really get out there and educate our people on all the aspects. And that's really one of the things that Elevate Movement focuses on, with those 8 dimensions. So we're talking about mental, emotional, we're talking about social, spiritual, vocational, financial, environmental, and let's talk about environmental. Let's really talk, and that's not just talking about the environment that God has created, but our environment as far as the environment that was created for us. So our schools in the area, our grocery stores in the area, our transportation in the area. How does that affect, then our willingness or ability to go get to the polls? So one of the things that I know we have a lot of efforts to get folks out there, and with the Texas laws and them changing, because one of the things that we did in the 2020 election was adopt a polling site where we passed out water and, just had good time and fellowship at the polling sites. Well, the laws have changed so much. I don't want anybody to get arrested for handing out a water bottle. So it's really not necessarily giving up, but regrouping, re-strategizing, and rethinking how we can, really still do the same things as far as getting our people out there to the polls, but in a way that won't get us, in litigation or, get us in trouble. So just kind of my 2 cents on that.
I think you spoke to something so important on the idea of misinformation or disinformation. I would love to hear like where y'all go or send people to, and even if it's your own specific, like obviously Texas Impact is one that I go to regularly to just try to stay up to date on everything. But where else are y'all going to make sure that you're getting good information? Good. I feel good about this.
Texas Impact has been pushing out all kinds of election resources. We have a page off of our website, Texas Faith Votes page, that has a lot of different resources. I'd encourage everybody to check that. We've already mentioned the League of Women Voters, Vote 411. I just finished up a 4-episode podcast series on elections in Texas, and so shameless plug time, I guess.
Well, for sure. That's what we're here for, right? Just to connect people to good stuff. And so all that can be found on Texas Impact's YouTube. Is that the best place to go to?
YouTube for the podcast, or your favorite podcast app. Just search Texas Impact Weekly Witness if you're watching, right there.
Yep.
So it should be available anywhere you find podcasts, but also the website. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, and I go to League of Women Voter a lot. I'm like, I guess as a geriatric millennial or whatever they call us now, but like I still go to Instagram a lot to still find information. And so finding those trusted resources of like League of Women Voter puts out really good stuff. You said the NAACP, they put out really good stuff. Faith in Texas puts out good stuff. So just other spaces like that or sources. I'd love to hear if you have any other ones too, guys.
So there's several coalitions. One that I really love to speak about because it was actually originated by an elected official. Our Vote, Our Voice was initiated by by Councilman Casey Thomas. A lot of resources they do get from the NAACP, but we also do a lot of partnerships with the National Panhellenic Council. So that's a historically Black sororities and fraternities, which I happen to be a member of. So shout out to Zeta Phi Beta. But also Urban League, the DFW Urban League Young Professionals. They're actually having a voting party on this Saturday to encourage people to get out to vote. Also have really good information. Councilman Casey Thomas will be going live on his, or posting every day, the early voting numbers on his page. So if you want to know how we did on early voting, go reference him. And there's these different resources. I know NAACP is a really good source for not just Dallas County, but also what we need in Tarrant County. Because let's talk about Tarrant County a little bit, y'all. Let's talk about Tarrant County a little bit. Tarrant County is kind of problematic. Let's look. If we're looking at being able to being a seat of power, Tarrant County remains the only municipality in Dallas, in the state of Texas, that remains really red. The other cities in Texas have been, blue strongholds. So what if by chance, and this is going a little partisan, but what if by chance we focused our issues on Tarrant County? If we go focused on some of the policies, COVID being a really, really big one. If we look at who's running for that particular office, they were formerly mayor on the Republican side, one of the folks. So if we look at the policies that was set in the city, you really want that to be in the county? If we're looking at it from a perspective of what happens in Tarrant affects what happens in Dallas. Tarrant County numbers go up. We don't have a wall that separates Dallas County and Tarrant County, right? So if their COVID numbers go up, so do ours. So, it's just important to really pay attention to not just what's happening in our immediate communities or in our immediate neighborhoods in Dallas, but to look at the Dallas-Fort Worth area and how it may not necessarily be our neighborhood, but you know what, Tarrant, let me give y'all some packets for you to hand out. Let me help y'all mobilize, because this is serious, right? This is really serious. Because even thinking forward beyond the election, 2023 is Texas Ledge session. So the more people we have in office that are about our values and our belief system, the less propensity we have for bad bills like SB 1. Let's just say that. So it's all connected, and really showing people kind of the consequences and how the dominoes are going to go when they're knocked down, I think is really big in that voter education and mobilization piece as well.
You said partisan, and maybe I'll get in trouble for this too, but the reality is, I don't care what party you represent. If you align with the values that I'm pushing for, and the values that I really try hard to push for are the values that, like, back to what you said earlier, are living like Jesus, right? Like, that's what I'm really trying to do. And that starts with really caring for my neighbor. And so it just so seems that right now it's a very partisan split. And I'm sure there are people who would argue the other side of that. And I'd be happy to have those conversations with them, right? Because I find myself voting way more partisan than I ever thought I would in my entire life. Because I used to be the guy who was like, well, I don't want to vote all down one ticket, because, like, I feel like that's not authentic. But it's getting harder and harder, right? Because the more I get grounded in my values, I just have a hard. Anyway, I'm going to get on a tangent here and probably get myself in trouble, because as a clergy person, I'm probably not supposed to be this partisan. But I do, though, right? Like, I want to be able to vote my values and make it known why I'm voting those specific values. And it gets back to, like you're saying, the holistic approach to how is my vote not just helping me and benefiting me, but really benefiting my neighbor. And, it turns out there were 1,100 people a week ago who were sleeping at Fair Park because it was so cold outside, and they didn't have enough, like, there's nowhere else to go for them, right? So they're housing them in Fair Park, which, thanks be to God, they're doing that, right? And I'm glad that that's the case. But, like, there's got to be a better solution. Why are there 1,100 people sleeping on the streets? Like, that's a bigger question that we need to be addressing as a city, as a county. And I'm ready for someone to step up and start addressing that, and, like, I don't care if they're blue or red. I don't care if there's somewhere in between. Like, that's just, to me, those are the important things we have to start addressing, and find me, politicians who are going to step up and make those things happen. That's what I'm interested in. So, again, come down off my
I think that's actually another talking point as we consider, like, education around voting in a faith community. I think a lot of people are accustomed to voting for whomever they feel best meets their personal needs. And it is a shift to think, I mean, even if it doesn't, to at least present the idea that maybe we need to be voting in a way that's best for the kingdom of God, or voting in the way that most aligns with gospel values, is, I think, the role of a faith community for us as clergy to raise that up as an ideal for us to be hopefully achieving. And I don't know that everybody's heard that. I mean, on the one hand, it seems pretty obvious, and at the same time, I think it does need to be articulated in the way that you have. I just want to affirm that and maybe elevate it just a little bit more even.
Yeah, if it's my vote, my voice, what is my voice really being used for? My own benefit, or the benefit of our community, and the benefit of those who, it's not that they don't have a voice, right? We know that for sure, but it's just their voice have been so muffled or so stamped out. They continue to have a voice, just nobody's listening to that voice. And so if your voice has power to it, and you have the ability to raise that voice, who are you going to raise it on the behalf of?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So one of the excuses that I've often heard why churches don't necessarily talk about elections and getting people out is because we shouldn't be talking about politics in the church. And I'm going to push back on that, because pretty much every arena you have in life, it's political, whether it be your job, whether it be the church, because let's be clear, denominations don't just run on kumbaya. Let's be honest with that. As a preacher's kid, both of my parents were ministers. I'm very aware how there is a hierarchy, and because there is a hierarchy, there are politics in there. So I think when we talk about politics and we talk about these different policies, we can't be afraid and to use it like it. Some people view it as like a 4-letter word. It's not the policy or being political that's the issue, because granted, that's going to produce some spirited conversations, because people are going to be on every, each side of the aisle or every side of the fence about it. But I find that those critical conversations are breeding ground for very good solutions, because the diversity of thought that is included in those conversations. So yes, we should be talking about politics in the church. We should, because, just like there was disagreements with the disciples, how Peter thought about things was very different than how Matthew and, thought about things. So, but at the end, they focused on the mission. They focused on the mission. Their method may be different, but they focused on the mission. And the same thing within our churches. Somebody may have different thoughts about the methodology on how we get this done, but I think it's worth having the conversation. So like, stop using the excuse that we don't want to be political. Stop it, because you're political every single day.
Well, and just to full circle us back to the beginning with the piece that I read from the social principles, the church should continually exert a strong ethical influence upon the state, supporting policies and programs deemed to be just and opposing policies and programs that are unjust. I mean, that's it, right? Like, that's what we're here to do, is to stand, and we don't have to go in a whole, liberation theology mentality right now. There's no time in the next couple of minutes, but like, who are we going to stand on the side of, right? Who are we going to stand up for? So I love this. This has been such a good conversation, and I did not know it was going to take this turn. I'm really glad it did, though, because I feel like that specific conversation that happened over the last 5 minutes here is, I feel like, something that always hovers under the surface. And it's like, as clergy, like, can we say that? Am I allowed to say that? I don't. But like, the reality is, like, y'all, if we're out here trying to do our best to fight for justice, then I think we have to say it. So, and not just say it, we got to do it too, right? So, and that's I think the challenge for all of us as faith communities too, is it's one thing to profess it, and we got to profess it, but we also got to get busy getting to work doing it too. And so, whether that's in March or whether that's in November, everywhere in between, we got to make sure that we are engaged, applying that strong ethical influence upon the state, right? And making sure that the things that we value and stand for as people of faith are being put in front of our elected officials day in, day out. And all God's people said, now I'm gonna preach. Yeah, I'm really grateful for your willingness to come and join me today. I know everybody has places to be and things to do, and it's just a busy time, but I'm really grateful for this conversation and for the work you continue to do in our community, in our state. And so I'll link as many of these links I can get in our show notes and stuff, so that people can find good resources. Again, Texas Impact, Faith Forward Dallas, Stacey, it's Elevate, right?
Yes, so I'll type it in the chat because it's
Great.
spelled a little weird. It's ELEV and then the number 8.
Okay.
Movement. Mhm.
Elevate movement. Yeah, we'll try to get people connected to good resources here, because if anything, it's a good conversation, but I want to make sure there's continued next steps too. So, final word from anybody? I open it up. You're welcome to send everybody off on a note here.
I'll just really echo what I said earlier. Be like Jesus. Get out, meet people where they are, meet the needs, care about them as people first, and you won't go wrong, because everybody wants to know how much you care before they know how much you know. So start there.
Love it.
Don't forget to vote. And
that.
and go watch Weekly Witness. I'm just trying to steal Scott's line before he gets it in there.
I wasn't going to say it.
I did it for you.
You can self-promote. I'm all for it. Look, the more we can connect one another, it's great.
There's a good board member. Y'all, this election is important. 95% of elections in Texas are going to be decided in the next 2 weeks. Go vote, bring a friend, organize your congregations, and let's get this thing done.
Amen, y'all. Thanks so much for your time. Appreciate you. And we'll be back next month with another conversation from our church and society. So we'll catch you then.
All right.
Blessings.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, y'all.